I'd like to welcome everyone to our third episode of the Sterling Council's 2025 Learning Series. My name is Laura McNeil. I'll be your host. Last week, week 2, Gordon Klein took us through a deep dive of two components of ADLI, approach and deployment. Approach, deployment, learning, and integration, just as a recap, are the acronym breakdowns for ADLI. During Gordon's session, he provided examples of how approach and deployment are used to focus on the characteristics required to ensure that the processes we put in place within our organization are deployed effectively throughout the entirety of the organization appropriately. During this week's discussion, we have Nichole Solomon with us. Nichole is Executive Director of Solomon Leadership Solutions, and she'll be covering the last two components of ADLI, learning and integration. So again, approach and deployment were covered last week by Gordon Klein. Feel free to review that video if you haven't seen it. Nichole Solomon, again, Executive Director of Solomon Leadership Solutions, will cover learning and integration this week for us. Learning and integration will actually focus on taking the process or the approach that we put in place and deployed throughout our organization and determining how to integrate that process or approach throughout our organization, how to determine how to integrate that process and approach throughout our organization, and then how to learn from it once it is integrated into our approaches. Just like the last two sessions, when Nichole finishes her presentation, we'll review a recap. I'll be taking notes as she goes through. We'll review a recap and a summary of the key points that she covers. And then we'll cover questions and answers, which you can funnel to us through the chat channel in this Zoom series. So welcome, Nichole. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to you to take us through learning and integration.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much, Laura. Just do a quick sound check. Can everyone hear me okay?
We can hear you.
All right, perfect. All right, thanks so much again, Laura. And I'd like to welcome everyone to the third session in our series. And I love the title here, Getting Better on Purpose, Learning and Integration. So again, my name is Nichole Solomon. I'm a master examiner with the Sterling Council. I've got 20 years of experience in state government. And as Laura mentioned, I'm the executive director of a small business that specializes in leadership development and coaching. So I am really, really passionate about this maturity model, ADLI, ADLI. And so today I'll be presenting on the L for learning and the I for integration. So let's go ahead and dive right in. So as Laura mentioned, over the last couple of sessions, we were introduced to the maturity model, and then Gordon described ADLI and LETC last week as the 7 words, right? So, and he specifically talked about A for deployment and A for approach and D for deployment. So I'll be diving right in to the L for learning and the I for integration today. So before I really start to get into the L for learning as it relates to this model, I want to do a little bit of differentiation here. And I want to kind of clarify. So when we think of the word learning, many times we're thinking about individual learning in our organizations. So there's individual learning, there's organizational learning, and then there's this concept of learning in this maturity model of ADLI. So let's talk very quickly about each one of those. So individual learning is about the individual, the single employee who's gaining new skills and new knowledge or capabilities. It's that employee who's maybe completing a data analytics course or going through their pre-service training, or maybe a manager who receives, coaching on how to be a better communicator. The result of individual or single employee learning is their performance getting better, the individual's performance getting better, and maybe becoming a stronger contributor to the organization. Whereas organizational learning, that's happening when teams and departments are sharing knowledge. They're learning from successes and failures, and they're applying those learnings and those lessons. So for example, an agency or a department may analyze a failed project and then use those insights to improve on future work, or they may share those best practices across departments to enhance their service delivery. Um, Now let's kind of go into the L for learning, right? So we've talked about A for approach, D for deployment. Now we're talking about L for learning in this maturity model. So it's broader, it's strategic. It combines in some cases both the individual learning and the organizational learning, and embeds that into how the organization operates. It focuses on how we use data and evidence and feedback to drive the improvement on the processes that we build. Some of the key characteristics of the L for learning is it's a part of our daily work. It's not just a side activity that we do. It's tied to our strategic goals. It's not just about task level improvements. It is shared, it's scalable, and it should be aligned to our processes and to our outcomes. So an example of this could be redesigning services based on customer feedback, right? We love to listen to our customers and improve. We use performance data, and maybe we use that to improve how we train our employees. We adapt practices based on strategic or environmental changes, where the ultimate goal is high performing, resilient, and agile businesses and organizations that are learning continuously and innovating by design. So there's some differences between the individual learning, the organizational learning, and how this is all put together in the L for learning in our maturity model. So, learning again in this maturity model, the L, it's how we're using our data. It's how we're using our experiences, the feedback we get from our employees, from our customers, from our stakeholders to improve over time. Again, it's not just about fixing one problem. It's about using what we learn to evolve our practices over time. Learning allows us to check. We've heard about the plan, do, check, act model, right? Learning allows us to check on how effective our approaches and our deployment, how effective those are working for us. I mean, if you think about it, the maturity model for me, the ADLI, feels very natural. We start something new, start a new process. That's the approach. Then we kind of share it, and that's, we start doing it. That's the deployment. And then we kind of naturally review it. How are we doing? What changes do we need to make? What have we discovered now that we've started something new? Right? What's the point of us continuing to do something that doesn't work? Right? So that learning is so important for us to continue to be ever evolving and getting better over time. And that's what we all want to do, right? We all want to get better over time. So we've talked a little about the L for learning, right? So we've talked about the individual learning, the organizational learning, and how it all fits with this maturity model of learning. Let's talk about the I for integration here. Okay, so ADLI, I for integration. Integration is kind of where it all comes together. It means making sure that our improvements, our values, and our practices are connected. They are connected across the entire organization. It's how everything fits together, so that our priorities, our information, and the operations of what we're doing every day, they all support each other. I think the best way to kind of explain integration is going to be through an example. So we're going to kind of continue our thread here of using the restaurant industry as an example to explain this maturity model of ADLI. So over the last couple of weeks, when we've talked about the restaurant examples, we've kind of broken up the restaurant into 3 segments, front of the house, back of the house, the support services of the restaurant. So I've got a great example for us today, and I'm going to take us on a journey here with a fictitious restaurant called the Bayfront Cafe. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the Bayfront Cafe. So the Bayfront Cafe, they are a small family-run restaurant. Okay. And they've decided that they want to institute a new reservation system. And they want to institute a new reservation system because they want their operations to run smoother. They want to provide better service, and they really want to build stronger relationship with their regular customers, especially because they have very busy weekends. Fridays and Saturdays are really busy days for them. So they want to kind of stabilize by instituting a new reservation system. So they've been doing this new reservation system for 3 weeks, and they are still experiencing really long wait times on Fridays and Saturdays. And this was the whole point of instituting this reservation system, is to stabilize that and not have their customers wait so long. What in the world is happening? How could they have instituted a reservation system and their wait times are actually longer than they were before the reservation system? What is happening? What's happening here? So the good news, at the Bayfront Cafe, they are all about learning and getting better. So learning and integration for them means that they've got to notice when something is not working, when something is going wrong, and they've got to figure out why. And they've got to make some smart changes here to kind of drive their performance in a positive direction, right? So the first thing they started doing is, once they noticed that this was not working, is they went into the kitchen, right? They went into the kitchen and they said, well, what is going on here? And the cooks are telling him the tickets are stacking up. I don't even have enough space on my grill to cook the burgers. Everything is stacking up. And they say, okay, well, what's going on there? They notice they're in the dining area. They're seeing that the customers are sitting really long. They're waiting. They're sitting long periods of time. So that kind of drove them to the kitchen. And the kitchen said, everything's behind. Everything's behind. So what's causing this? So then they go to the front of the house. They started looking at what the servers were doing. And then they went to the hostess area. They noticed two critical issues that caught their attention. First, they noticed that they had a couple of their servers who were taking really long breaks. Okay, they were taking smoke breaks and they were nowhere to be found. So they weren't going to get the food and bringing out to the customers. So everything was backing up in the kitchen and the customers were waiting long. They weren't getting their food fast enough. The other big critical issue that they noticed was that the hostess was all over the place. Okay. And the hostess, even though they had a reservation system, they still decided they would sit some walk-ins as they could. But what they noticed was that their hostess was sitting lots of walk-ins, kind of giving away reserved tables, and everything was getting backed up because of it. And in fact, the hostess was actually kind of sitting her friends and family who didn't make any reservations to begin with. It was messing up the whole process. So no wonder the wait times were longer. It wasn't necessarily that the reservation platform system itself wasn't working. It was the team members who were responsible for implementing and following the process of this new reservation system. They weren't really following the process or the procedures. So the Bayfront Cafe, they were able to learn, right? They were able to learn that their implementation of this new reservation system left a lot to be desired, right? So here's what they did. So to address the issues, right? Their leadership team, they said, let's take 5 steps here. Let's look through this. So the first thing they did is they kind of had to revisit and update any of their operating procedures for how the reservation system was used, right? How they had to seat customers, when servers could take breaks and how long those breaks should be. And the expectations around that were reinforced through team huddles and visual seating guides for their team members. Those things were posted so they could really understand what the process is and what it should look like. They had to retrain, right? They had to do some targeted retraining on how to use the reservation system for their hostess and how to manage those walk-ins. It wasn't that you couldn't have walk-ins, we had to manage the walk-ins, right? So the hostess their role had to be clarified to make sure that they were fair and consistent with their guest flow. They also, again, remember, compliance with their servers on their break schedules. So they had to embed learning here. They had to hold team debriefs. So they held a team debrief, right? They said, hey, let's talk about what went wrong here. Let's do some lessons learned, because they wanted to foster ownership for all sections of the restaurant. So everybody really understood what their roles were and took ownership of their roles in this new process and allowed the staff to give some feedback as well, right? from their perspective of what was working to make sure that the flow of walk-ins versus reservations was as it should be, and to also give the staff the opportunity to communicate any of their concerns. And those insights were documented as well. They had to align operations across the restaurant. There's your integration right there, right? Front and back of the house staff had to align before each shift on the pacing and the seating strategy. Real-time dashboards can be used here, and they started using real-time dashboards to display wait times and seating status and ticket volumes. That helped improve their coordination. And remember, managers, I mentioned this, the managers had to kind of walk the floor. They wanted to make sure things were working in real time to support the compliance of the process and do any just-in-time coaching that may need to be done in that moment to keep the flow working well. And how do we know we're doing well? They had to monitor, they had to measure. So they had to set up some key success metrics so that they knew in real time, how are things going? How is the turnover time with their tables? Is it meeting what they expect it to meet so they can keep those reservations going and they wouldn't run into reservation issues or wait time complaints from their customers, right? So this new plan that they put in place at the Bayfront Cafe, it wasn't just to fix the one problem on the one day, right? They were looking at enterprise-wide, what went wrong. They asked themselves the question. They talked to the team so they could figure out exactly what was wrong and then their strategy to learn from that and make changes across the entire ecosystem of the Bayfront Cafe, front of the house, back of the house, support services, right? So let's talk about learning and integration and kind of outcomes of what comes from that. True learning does not stop at the individual level. Sometimes we see that in organizations where it's learning is siloed and one area learns something, but it doesn't really get changed overall. So we aren't really able to see the true best outcomes that we could. So it doesn't stop at the individual level. In our high performing organizations, learning is embedded through integration, where it's the people and the processes and the data help work in concert with each other, right? So to turn the insights of what's going wrong into impact, to the changes we want to make to drive our performance in the direction that we want to drive it in. So just as we said, this model of athlete approach, deployment, learning, and integration, it is not just applicable in our business life, in our business life, in our professional life, in our workplaces. This can be applied to all aspects, right? So here's a couple of personal examples, or before actually I get into personal example, I want to talk about the barriers and breakthroughs. I mentioned this earlier. Some of the common barriers to learning and how that learning can be translated across the entire system is if learning is kept in silos, right? We don't want just our learning to just be individually based, right? If we don't have processes to share our best practices across departments, across teams, across the whole system, we really are setting up barriers to how learning in one area can be translated and really help drive performance across any given area or process. What we can see happening sometimes is maybe one department improves or one area improves and is really efficient, but others don't. That can be a clue that there's some barriers to learning and how that learning is shared. We want to empower continuous improvement here as well, right? So one of the ways that we see, learning happening in intelligent ways is if we start a new process, maybe we test it. We love doing small pilots so that we can learn in small areas that then can branch out into the larger areas. We want to empower continuous improvement by recognizing and rewarding process improvements that are happening in our organizations, right? And consider this, when areas are performing really well and those results speak for themselves, that can actually support resource requests that you may have for better funding, or for more items that your areas may need to continue to do the great work. as it relates to process improvement. So now I'll actually talk a little bit about how some of this translates into other areas of our life, right? The Adley model can be used in all kinds of ways. So when we think about, maybe our fitness, many of us take the approach of we're going to lose weight, right? So we start working out, we start going to a certain gym, or we start a certain routine, and then we realize maybe this is working, maybe this isn't, right? Is there a way I can learn from what I've been doing so far to make even better improvements? So maybe I try a new workout, and maybe now I sync that up with a new diet plan that's giving me better results. What about a personal example of a career change or maybe an advancement in your career, right? So, if you think about what can I do to kind of, move forward, I'm doing this particular job, I'm deploying it, I'm doing it every day. Maybe I'm ready for something to change. Something's got to pivot here. Maybe I learn and I take a new class, right? Maybe I involve myself with mentorship or coaching, and how I integrate that. So maybe I integrate that by taking on a stretch assignment in my current job that's aligned with the new skills that I'm trying to learn or practice to help me prepare myself for a career change or a career advancement. Okay. So learning becomes really powerful when it moves from when it comes from knowing, and doing consistently. Integration is when our behaviors and our systems and decisions, they're aligned with the values, whether those are our personal values or whether those are the values and the strategic goals of our organizations. It's not just about checking the box that I got certified in something. It's about how we shift our identity. And in that second example of the career change, right? How do we shift things, our identity? How do we learn new skills and align those? That's the key. Align those with some strategic goals, whether those are the strategic goals of our organization, if we're talking about organizational maturity, or whether it's our own personal examples there as well. So over the last couple of weeks, Gordon and I have talked about this maturity model: A for approach, D for deployment. I've today talked about L for learning, and I for integration, right? So think about this in terms of we start a new process, right? A for approach, we deploy it, we execute it, we put it out there in the world. And like I said earlier, it feels natural to me. We start something new, we start doing it, then we say, hey, is this working or not? And if it's not, what do we do to course correct? What do we do to ask the questions, to speak to the right people, to look at the data, to look at the feedback, to say, what can we do to improve upon that? And then we take that information and we implement changes. And we don't just do it in a siloed way with one area. We share that and integrate it across our organizations, across operational units as appropriate, across the ecosystem as appropriate. In the restaurant examples that we've been using over the last couple of weeks, how do we integrate our learning, not just to the kitchen, but also to the front of the house, also to the support services? And the key here is that we rinse and repeat for all of the processes that we have. How do we take learning and integration for each one of those processes to make them help us push in the right direction? It really helps build our maturity and as an organization. And in the next coming weeks, you're really going to hear some more from other master examiners on the levels, the LETC piece of this, right? So Gordon and I have talked about the Adley piece. So in the coming weeks, you will hear some great information about LETC. And so now, Laura, before I hand it back over to you to see what kind of questions we may have, a good discussion we could have with our participants, I just want to ask the audience to think about this for themselves when it comes to learning. So if you're in your organization and maybe there is a great process that you all have in your organization that's working really well, have you shared that with another part of your organization? Have you shared that best practice? Is there opportunities built into how your organization operates to share those best practices, to learn from one another. And sometimes you think, well, they do something really different than me. That, there's not, this side of my organization does something really different and I do something really different. That's okay. Though, how can they learn from how you put that process together? Those learnings can certainly translate to all types of components of your business. So, what's one improvement that you can today, tomorrow, go and share with another team, and vice versa, that they can share with you, that you can take some key nuggets away to help you improve? So, Laura, that's the end of my portion of the presentation. Laura, I actually want to hand it over to you to see what questions we may have in the chat.
Yeah, and before we get to questions, I'm going to run through the summary real quick with you, Nichole. So if I didn't get anything right, please tell me to course correct for our audience.
Absolutely.
And it was a lot. You covered a lot of ground. So thank you very much for that, Nichole. So from a learning perspective, I captured learning in an organization occurs at different levels: individual, organizational, and then through cycles of learning within an organization's ADLI maturity model. Learning is a check or a validation of how well our approach and deployment are working in relation to achieving our mission and vision and supporting our shared values. Learning allows us to check how effective our approaches are working for us. And I love the connection you drew to Plan, Do, Check, Act, because that check I put in bold and capitalized aligns with the check in the PDCA, the Plan, Do, Check, Act model. Learning includes the use of experimentation, listening, and making improvements. Sometimes it's better to do them small bits at a time. Learning processes demonstrate how an organization uses data, experience feedback, and innovative techniques to continuously evolve, because we're always going to continuously evolve. We have to, otherwise we'll be shutting our doors. Mm-hmm. This includes a process to identify when, not just to start doing something, but I put the opposite down, Nichole. I said to stop doing something. In your example, in the restaurant example, the servers smoking, those long smoke breaks, I know, those things that we have to stop doing and pivot and start doing something differently, is why I put that down there. From an integration perspective, I included integration differs from learning as it focuses on integrating approaches, improvements. I hope I got everything. Key practices, values, and teams across the organization on a set of common goals and objectives. Right? Very key, yes. I think, is the common goals and objectives. Integration is how everything fits together for the sake of building an organization's brand and unifying priorities, information, operations, and outcomes. And in the restaurant example you provided for I think you called it the Bayfront Cafe, we introduced a new reservation process that was deficient because it hadn't cross-trained or made all of the teams that needed to work together aware of the importance of this new system and the outcomes that we were focusing on. So since all the teams were not aware and fully engaged, the adoption of the system out of the gate was not 100% effective, and there were opportunities. The other thing I really like that you identified were barriers, because barriers, if you know where the barriers are, you know how to pivot and do better. So the barriers you identified for learning is that learning is not always shared. Some people keep their learning in a silo. They want to protect their learning. They don't want anybody to know about their learning. I don't know why, but it's a protective thing, and they look at it that way. That's a barrier. Lack of best practice sharing, right? If like you brought out the example of, hey, if you know of a process that's working really well, go ahead and see where it can apply somewhere else. And that draws a dichotomy or an example to me in regard to hospitals and hotels benchmarking with each other. Why? Because they're housing people, and those people have needs, and that's a common element that they share. So it is really good to think about best practice and how one can share, even if it's not in the same industry. Then you also called out one department improves while others related do not improve, that, and not recognizing that as a barrier to organizational improvement. You did call out some remedies for these barriers. Small changes, pilot first, recognize and reward the process improvements, and then use results to learn. And I think you can't emphasize that enough, because I know you, and I know that's, where you're driving. And then support resource requests, right? If there's a resource that's coming out and saying, hey, I have this need, think about it and take it on as a challenge for an opportunity to improve. Then when you wrapped up, I have 4 bullets for wrap up. Hope I got them all. Learning exists at all levels within the organization. Again, it starts with the individual, then goes to the team, then permeates throughout the organization, cross team, cross enterprise. Learning requires curiosity through the monitoring of performance and feedback. Integration comes to life through alignment between teams, process metrics, and strategic objectives. And in high performing organization, learning becomes embedded through integration, where our people, our processes, the data and decisions will work in concert, turning those insights into impact. I hope I got everything. It was a lot that you covered,
Okay.
and it was well
Yeah.
done.
Thank you.
We are out of time, but I am going to close, Nichole, for those that want to stay and listen to the
Mhm.
one question that I do have.
Okay.
In the examples you provided, so for those that need to drop, we understand we're out of time. Please feel free. We will be posting this recording on the sterlingcouncil.com website in the summer learning series section. But here's the question for those that do want to stay. The examples you provided were pivoting, like introducing something and then learning in
Mhm.
cycle. How would you recommend to the audience, the listeners here,